The sun hung low over the endless Texas plains, turning the sky into a soft wash of orange and gold. The wind drifted slow and dry, carrying with it the faint creak of a wooden windmill and the smell of dust. Out there, where time itself seemed to move slower than anywhere else, a man named Eli Carter tended his land like it was all he had left in the world. Eli was a rancher, quiet, deliberate, and alone. He'd buried his wife 3 winters ago after fever took her. Since then, the ranch had become both his duty and his prison. Each morning he rose before sunrise, fed the horses, mended the fences, and watched the horizon. There was something about the silence of the plains that matched the silence inside him. That afternoon, while leading his horse back from the north pasture, Eli saw something unusual near the old cottonwood tree by the creek, a faint movement, too still to be an animal. He slowed his step, one hand resting on the worn handle of his revolver. When he got closer, he saw her. A young woman, barely standing, her clothes torn by the wind and her body marked with scratches and dust. She looked lost, half-starved, and afraid. For a moment, she tried to speak, but her voice cracked like dry wood. "Please," she whispered. Then she fell to the ground. Eli rushed forward, kneeling beside her. She was light as air when he lifted her. Her skin burned with fever. Without a thought, he carried her back to the ranch, laid her on the small bed in the spare room, and fetched water from the pump. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she came from, but he knew she needed help, and help was something he could still give. The following days passed in slow rhythm, much like the wind that brushed across the plains. The woman slept most of the time, murmuring in her dreams. Eli made broth, cleaned her wounds, and sat quietly by the window while the sun moved across the room. When she finally woke, it was early morning. Her eyes opened slowly, uncertain, as if she wasn't sure if she was alive or dead. "You're safe," Eli said softly. "You're at my ranch. You've been out for 3 days." She tried to sit up, but winced at the pain in her leg. Where am I?" "About 10 miles south of Dry Creek," he said. "You were lying by the cottonwood. Thought you might not make it." She blinked a few times before whispering, "Why did you help me?" Eli paused. "Because no one else would." Her name, she said later, was Clara. She'd been traveling with a wagon train heading west, hoping for a new start. But out there, dreams often broke faster than bones. Bandits had struck, taking their horses, their food, and leaving her for dead. Eli listened, his weathered face unreadable. He didn't ask for more. He simply nodded, offering her another bowl of soup. After a long silence, Clara said quietly, "You paid for me." Eli frowned. "What do you mean? When you gave up your time, your food, your peace? You didn't have to. You paid for me with kindness. Now, do it." He looked at her for a moment, unsure. "Do what?" "Let me work," she said. "Let me earn what you gave. I can help around the ranch." For the first time in years, Eli smiled, small, tired, but real. "You don't owe me a thing," he said. But Clara insisted, and from that day, she began to move slowly through the ranch, learning the rhythm of life there. She helped feed the chickens, brushed the horses, and fetched water. She wasn't strong yet, but her spirit was stubborn. The days stretched into weeks. The sky rolled from blue to gold to star black, and the sound of wind became their steady companion. Eli would often watch Clara from the porch, her hair catching the light as she worked near the corral. There was something steady about her presence, something that filled the emptiness he hadn't known how to cure. At night, they sometimes shared supper at the small wooden table. She would tell him small things, about the town she came from, her brother who used to carve wooden toys, and how she'd once dreamed of owning a little patch of land by a river. Eli, in return, spoke little, but when he did, his words carried weight. He told her about his wife, Mary, and how she used to hum old hymns while cooking. He told her about the drought that nearly broke him. Through those quiet evenings, something unspoken grew between them, not romance in its fiery form, but something gentler, rooted in survival and shared solitude. One evening, a storm rolled in from the north. The wind howled through the cracks in the barn, and the sky turned a dark, bruised gray. Eli and Clara worked together, tying down the horses and securing the roof. The rain came hard, drumming on the tin and soaking their clothes. When it was done, they stood in the doorway, dripping, breathless, laughing quietly at their own exhaustion. Clara looked at him then, truly looked. "You don't talk much, do you?" Eli gave a half smile. "Nothing worth saying most of the time." "Well," she said softly, "sometimes silence says enough." They stood there until the thunder faded and the plains went quiet again. Weeks later, a rider came from town, a trader named Harlan, who often brought news and supplies. He eyed Clara curiously, then turned to Eli. "You picked up trouble, Carter?" he asked. Eli's jaw tightened. "She's no trouble." Harlan spat on the ground. "Word is, a bounty man's been looking for a runaway woman fits her description. Says she owes a debt to some folks west of here." Clara went pale. "That's not true," she said quickly. "They bought me out of desperation. I didn't owe them anything." Eli didn't know what to believe, but he'd seen the fear in her eyes before, the kind that only comes from being hunted. After Harlan left, Clara sat by the fire, hands trembling. "You shouldn't have helped me," she whispered. "They'll come for me." Eli looked at her quietly. "Let them. This land's seen worse men than them." She met his gaze, surprised. "Why would you risk that?" He turned back to the fire. "Because you were right, Clara. I paid for you, with my peace. Now I'll see it through." The days that followed were tense. Every sound in the distance felt like warning. Eli kept his rifle close and his horse saddled. Clara worked quietly but never far from the house. One afternoon, the men came. Two of them, hard eyes, long coats, and the cold confidence of bounty hunters. They rode up slow, dust trailing behind. Eli met them at the gate. "We're looking for a woman," one said. "Name's Clara Finch. Ran off owing money." Eli didn't flinch. "Ain't no one here by that name." The man smirked. "Mind if we look around?" Eli's voice hardened. "I do mind." A long silence stretched between them. The wind carried nothing but the sound of creaking leather and distant thunder. Finally, the lead hunter leaned forward. "You paid for her, old man. Don't make us take her back." Eli's eyes narrowed. "You'll ride away now," he said quietly. "Before I decide that payment wasn't enough." The tension broke like a snapped wire. One man reached for his gun, but Eli was faster. Two sharp cracks echoed across the plain. The horses screamed and scattered. When the dust settled, the bounty men were gone. Clara ran out from the house, breathless. "Eli," he shook his head, "it's done." Her eyes filled with tears. "You could have been killed, maybe," he said, "but some things are worth dying for." That night, the wind was soft again. Clara sat on the porch steps, staring at the stars. Eli joined her, lowering himself slowly beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "You didn't have to do any of this." "I know," he said. "Then why?" He looked out over the dark land. "Because I remembered what it's like to lose everything. I couldn't let that happen to someone else." Clara turned toward him, her face calm in the moonlight. "You gave me my life back, Eli." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe we both got a second chance." Over the next months, the ranch began to change. The fences stood straighter, the horses looked healthier, and laughter returned to the small house on the hill. Clara's strength came back, and with it, her spirit. She learned to ride, to rope, and even to fix the wagon wheels when they broke. Eli watched her work and sometimes caught himself smiling without realizing it. One morning, she brought him coffee as he stood watching the sunrise. "Eli," she said, hesitating. "You remember when I said you paid for me?" He nodded slowly. "I was wrong," she said softly. "You didn't pay for me. You freed me." Eli looked at her for a long moment, his eyes gentle. "And you freed me too." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of all the words they didn't need to say. A year later, people in town began to speak of Eli Carter and his wife, Clara. Some said they'd married quietly one spring morning under the old cottonwood tree, the same place where he'd first found her. Others said it wasn't a wedding that bound them, but the life they built together, the shared work, the trust, and the peace that only two wounded souls could give each other. Either way, they were happy. Each evening, when the sun dipped low and the horizon burned with light, Eli and Clara would stand by the fence, watching the land breathe beneath the sky. The wind would rise and move through the grass like an old hymn. Sometimes she would slip her hand into his, and he would squeeze it gently. And in that quiet, endless moment, it was clear, what had begun as a rescue had become something far deeper. It wasn't about payment, or debt, or survival anymore. It was about finding home, in another person. Years later, when strangers passed by the Carter Ranch, they would often see two rocking chairs on the porch and a pair of voices humming a tune that carried softly into the evening air. One chair belonged to the rancher who once thought his heart had died. The other to the woman who proved him wrong. And together, they lived out their days beneath the same wide sky that had once watched over their pain, now watching over their peace. The wind kept whispering across the plains, the same way it always had. But if you listened closely, you could almost hear it say, "You paid for me, now do it." And what they did, in the end, was live.